David Clark.
Mr Speaker, it's a delight to get up to support this bill. We in the Labor Party can see the benefit of exploring this area. The Act has been in place since 1987, I understand, and in that 26 years, the horticultural industry has changed significantly. And so it seems timely to revisit the Act and to make sure that we are setting up the appropriate structure to support New Zealand horticulture exports from New Zealand. It is no surprise, and it will come as no surprise to anyone in this House, that as a country it benefits us to work together to achieve scale, to be able to market our product abroad in a way that draws attention to its many benefits. And if I can draw a parallel, I know that when I sat on a board in Otago that was concerned with growing the region, one of the better initiatives to come out of it in the time that I was involved was to market apples from the region and market them as organic, which achieved a price premium, and that marketing was only achieved by agreement of all of the producers in the area, or the players who had the say in whether an initiative would be put forward for this. From memory, the apples achieved a 15% price premium as a result of being marketed as organic, and the change required in behaviour to market these products was nothing, absolutely nothing. The area where the apples were grown and are grown is relatively free of pests because it's an area that is sufficiently cold at the right times of year. So the apples were being grown in an organic fashion. They simply were not being marketed in that way. But by achieving scale, by achieving agreement across the region to market a product in a certain way, it could achieve a market premium. And this is part of what I imagine will be achieved by this bill. It will enable producers to come together to pool resources in a modern way to market products abroad and to make sure that minimum standards are being met so that the products can legitimately be marketed in a way that will be attractive overseas. So let me have the rare privilege of congratulating the government on updating some legislation. It is good that they are doing this. New Zealand is too small to operate at a smaller scale and compete in many of these areas. There are other areas, of course, which ought to have similar treatment applied, and some government leadership would go a long way. For example, in the meat industry, where we know that many producers are struggling as they have overheads which make the area less profitable over time, and yet they have capital barriers to achieving effective market structures, and a government that has been unwilling to show leadership in that area. But that shouldn't stop me congratulating the government on this particular initiative, which does show some leadership in this area, and albeit rare, it is a thing that should be welcomed, because this government is failing overall to achieve its export targets, and that is something of a background to this bill. It was the government's target, and I believe still is, to raise New Zealand exports to 40% of GDP. When the government started, New Zealand exports were over 30% of GDP. They are now below 30% of GDP. The government is actually going backwards and forecasts to go backward further in the area of exports as an overall portion of our gross domestic product. The government has as one of its central agendas something it calls the business growth agenda, which is supposed to achieve this 40% target, but in fact, as I've just explained, the government is moving in the opposite direction. And so overall, unfortunately, the government's unwillingness to lead in the area of economic diversification and unwillingness to make real progress in this area is hampering New Zealand as a country in terms of our future prosperity, in terms of being able to achieve the Kiwi dream that every New Zealander used to have, of having a secure income and opportunity throughout their lifetime to make the most of life. We have the lowest home ownership rates in New Zealand since 1951. There's one example of how that Kiwi dream is drifting away. And Labour of course, has a vision to bring back that Kiwi dream, to actually grow our exports, to have increasing prosperity as a country, and to afford the kind of lifestyle that we think all New Zealanders ought to be able to have. This bill itself does aim to enable product groups to develop more flexible and targeted export marketing strategies. And it does that through the permissive mechanisms of collecting levies. And it establishes a relationship with the bodies, the different horticultural product groups, rather than directly with the producers and exporters. In the past, the levies were only allowed to be directly received from the producers and exporters, as I understand it, and now the government the New Zealand Horticulture Export Authority will be able to charge fees to horticultural product groups, and they will be able to then onwards levy their members. Now, this mechanism will of course make the whole process a little more efficient, a little more modern, and it has got to be practical if our exporters are to be left free to get on with doing what they do best, to grow the products that we want to sell offshore. Now, in the 1980s, of course, when the Act was first brought in, we know that we had some big issues in this area. We had fly-by-night exporters that would send one crop off on a boat, not caring about the reputation of the country. This Act and its updated version also enables fines for misbehaviour, for things that do harm to the industry as a whole, and that is important if we are to present a New Zealand Inc. image abroad, if we are to continue to establish our clean green credentials and to sell our products at a premium on the international stage. And that is, after all, what we would like to do as a country, and to move towards that more prosperous future that we, I think across the House, would like to see, albeit that we may differ on the ways that we might get there, and I may have some criticisms of the government's particular approach. I think we all share the desire to see a more prosperous future. So, as I said at the outset, we will be supporting this bill. We will be supporting the more flexible and targeted export market strategies that we think will result from this bill, and also the intention, which I haven't spoken to yet, of clarifying the requirements for product groups to enter and to exit the export framework. Which seems, again, a sensible modernising move. In the papers that we've been supplied so far, that is part of what the bill sets out to achieve. All of these things will be examined in select committee, and we will have the opportunity as members to contribute, those that sit on the primary growth committee, and those that want to substitute in to refine the Act and make sure that it actually does get on with the job of making sure that those credentials, the ways that the entering and exiting of that particular framework happen are as good as they can be, to make sure that the process is set up optimally, and to make sure that when the powers of those bodies to levy are set, that they're set up in a way that actually clarifies the Act and makes it more user-friendly for the groups that will be doing the exporting. So, although the government overall is failing to meet its export targets, we see this as a small positive step in the right direction, and it's nice to see that they're not, in this regard, distracted by hair straighteners or over-expensive TV screens or barbecue sun decks or blow-up sheep. Here is one occasion where they're taking a small step in the right direction, and making sure that New Zealand's exporters are supported through up-to-date legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, we will be supporting this bill and the promotion of the New Zealand Inc. brand abroad with respect of horticultural products.
Stuart.